So welcome. My name is Jake. I am an organizer with the Stop Trump Coalition. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar, which is being recorded. I'd just also like to say that we do have the chat function open, so you are able to use the chat function. We also have the Q&A function available. You can put your questions throughout the webinar into either of them. Please do write in who you are, where you're coming from. We are also aware, obviously, that as the far right seek to disrupt various kind of spaces online, that this could be a potential target. So if there's any, dubious posting into the chat, we may have to close the chat and just use the Q&A function. So we do want the chat to be a space where you can all talk and share thoughts and questions. So please do use it, but we ask that you respect everyone else who's attending on the call today. We're thrilled as the Stop Trump Coalition to be joined by Christina Pagel. The Stop Trump Coalition ourselves, we're a group of campaigners across the UK who are determined to resist not just Donald Trump, but Trumpism. We know the far right are on the move, not just in the US, but all over the world. And we bring together our experience organizing on countering racism, Islamophobia, fighting for climate action, organizing workers and defending migrants and refugees' rights, and also campaigning for trade justice and tax justice to help build the broadest coalition possible to stop Trump and to stop the far right around the world. So I'd like to quickly thank the Stop Trump supporters. Many of you would have joined us from our mailing list or social media. We're entirely funded through public donations, and so we're really grateful to our supporters who sign up and contribute with small monthly donations to make all of our work possible, and who have made today's webinar possible. So thank you so much. We'll move into it. We're thrilled to be joined by Professor Christina Pagel, who's Professor of Operational Research at University College London, using mathematical tools to support the delivery of health services. And since January 2025, Christina has been tracking authoritarian actions of the Trump administration on the Trump Action Tracker, and writing about the implications for the US and the world. She is president-elect of the UK Operational Research Society and a fellow of the Academy of Medical Sciences, and actually has a far more illustrious CV than I can put right into the chat right now. So we're going to waste no time. And Christina, we're going to hand over to you. Thank you for joining us.
All right. Well, no, thank you for having me. Right, let me share my screen. So can everyone see that? Yeah. Okay, good. Right. So I'm going to kind of almost exactly, well, we're exactly a year really since Trump's inauguration. So I'm going to talk about a little bit, just introduce the tracker, but then I'm going to show you how it can be used to look at specific aspects of the last year. So I'm going to go into some detail about foreign aggression, which has really escalated, domestic aggression, and then what that might mean for the midterms. And then I just want to end on kind of naming it for what it is. So I think the first thing to say is, and I know that I guess no one on this call needs me to say it, but I feel that some of our leaders may need me to say it, that Trump's second term is not politics as usual. And talking about America as this great ally, it doesn't make any sense. It has embraced a populist right-wing authoritarian playbook. And you just have to go on to the official Twitter accounts of the main departments. And it is full of basically nationalistic, white supremacist imagery, demonization of foreigners. These are all ones that I just went to today since January this year. And it really is quite blatant, the imagery and the message. Again, very clear America first, but also, who's not included, right? It's basically white people. And there is this real painting of the state being order, of Democrats being disorder. So here they are quite clearly saying that Democratic Minnesota is anarchy. And they are already considering, I think they have started prosecutions of Governor Tim Walz. So, every day brings new headlines about the US, and it's almost impossible to keep up with it. And so one of the things that happened basically is that within a couple of weeks of inauguration, I was already feeling overwhelmed. And so I started just writing down everything that I could remember that had happened. And I realized that you could categorize it. You could categorize it into these distinct domains of authoritarianism. Um, and and so I did it basically. And then once I'd done that, I thought at that point there was like 70 things. And I thought, well, I'll just keep going, right? I've started, so I'll just keep going. And I didn't really think that much about it. At first, it was just a Google spreadsheet. Then I got a volunteer to help me keep track. And then I got a volunteer to help me build a website. And that's kind of just kept going ever since. It's all done in basically our spare time. We've now done it. We've now tracked over 2,250 authoritarian actions since January. And I see it as it's not even going to be complete. Like there are things that I will have missed. Everything has to be reported in a kind of either a mainstream news source or a direct quote from a tweet or a video or something that is clearly incontrovertible. So this is kind of how it breaks down. So I'm actually tracking across 10 domains of authoritarianism. I kind of selected those domains based on reading people like Timothy Schneider, Stephen Levitsky, and Applebaum, who are kind of international experts in authoritarianism. But it's things like violating democratic norms, undermining rule of law, hollowing the state. So that was particularly quite big early on in terms of like Doge and things like that. But they've slashed tens of thousands of federal workers, suppressing dissent or weaponizing the state against enemies. So dissent comes with a cost now in the US, whether it's in the media, your political opponents, civil society. Basically, if you speak out, you are putting yourself up for punishment. And we've seen that. So there were six Democratic people of Congress who recently did a video basically just saying to the army, follow the law. All of them are now being investigated. Controlling information, which includes things like spreading misinformation. So, for instance, there's been a lot of that coming from the Department of Human Services, which is the health department by RFK Jr., and it also includes propaganda. So things, for instance, like the official position of the US that Trump won the 2020 election would go in that category. Control of science to align with state ideology. I mean, there's been a lot of that. I'm not actually going to cover it today, but there's been a lot in terms of basically there's no government funded research into climate change and massive cutbacks on funding into vaccines and immunology. Undermining of universities, schools, museums, and culture, very classic authoritarian move. Weakening civil rights, so that includes things like weakening trade unions, and it includes all of the anti-diversity measures. Corruption and enrichment isn't one of the most prevalent things, but there's been just this constant stream of corruption happening in the background. Aggressive foreign policy and global destabilization, which I'll talk quite a lot about today, and also then anti-immigrant or militarized nationalism, again, which I will talk about today and has been an increasing feature of the regime. So this is kind of how the number of actions breaks down over time. And you can see just in terms of sheer numbers logged, it peaked in September, although October and November was kind of, I think there were distractions. It was government shutdown and also the whole hoo-ha over Epstein, a lot of which didn't put in, because to me that was kind of political scandal and most of it wasn't authoritarian. But that said, I also think that one of the reasons we're seeing fewer actions now is that Trump's done a lot of what he wanted to do. He's subdued the universities. He's slashed the state. They've got control of the major scientific bodies. So in that sense, they've achieved a lot of the things that they set out to achieve in those domains, so they don't have to keep going. This is just a screenshot of what it looks like. So each action comes with a link to a news site. This is, say, The Guardian, Reuters, New York Times. You can see what categories it's been filed under. You can filter by date, domain. You can do word searches, and you can also download any subset of the data as a CSV file. So the idea is it's there as a resource for people if they want to kind of search for things, find out what happened, look at specific date, time, or whatever it is. Um, this is just showing you kind of how actions are spread across the different domains. I'm not really going to go into it too much, except to say undermining democracy has been a pretty consistent, large part of it. And you can see here the growth in global destabilization and nationalism. So let's have a look at foreign aggression. And this is just the count of actions that I've categorized as foreign policy, aggressive foreign policy, or destabilizing the global world order. You can see that actually since the summer, this has really increased. And when you look at what kind of things they are, it's use of force and threats of military action. So those are things like bombing Iran, threats towards Greenland, Panama, Canada, Gaza, you name it, action against Venezuela. It's those kinds of things. Then there's the economic warfare, right? It's trade war, it's tariffs, it's sanctions, it's economic coercion, where Trump will try and use the economic might of America to force things to go his way. And that includes things like the EU regulations around tech and so on. Then there's the bit where it's about withdrawing from the international world order, which is ironic given that America helped set it up, 80 years ago. But it's things like, withdraw from the Paris Agreement, WHO, COP30. They've literally just withdrawn from another 66 UN organizations, undermining the UN Human Rights Council. It's a refusal to back international agreements. They're not signing things. They're not signing up to things. They're not going to things. And an absolute hatred of the EU. I think the EU, with its kind of multilateralism, is kind of the opposite of everything that the American administration stands for right now. Then the fourth type is kind of restrictive immigration, refugee, and humanitarian policies. So obviously, they've banned asylum. There's things like travel bans from certain countries. As of a couple of weeks ago, they've now got travel bans on 75 countries. It's about withdrawing from all international aid and also basically making it a lot more expensive to come to America, and making it much harder to come to America if you've ever said anything negative about it. Oh yeah, sorry. And the last one is alignment with authoritarian regimes and destabilizing of democratic norms. So it is things like consistently supporting Russia over Ukraine. It's making it the official policy of the US government to promote far-right populist movements across Europe. That is in their latest national security strategy. It's interfering in other countries' elections and judicial processes. So, I mean, obviously, there's Maduro, but it's things like in Argentina, it's threatening sanctions if they didn't re-elect the government who was supportive of Trump. And this is how they break down. So by far the biggest category is this use of force and threats of military action. And then it's restricting immigration, and basically restricting its refugee and cancelling its humanitarian policies. But they're all significant. And if we just look at it over time, you can see that one of these types is not like the others. So the others have increased or stayed the same, but really it's this militarization and use of force has incredibly escalated. And it started really with starting to do the boat strikes in the Caribbean and Pacific, then the attack on Venezuela, then the threats against Greenland, and in fact, various other countries. Just kind of thinking a bit more broadly about the threat to Europe. So you've got defense and security. I mean, it's undermining NATO now, potentially destroying NATO. I mean, I don't know if anyone really believes that America would be there if a European state triggered Article 5. I find it hard to believe that. It's removing support from Ukraine, forcing a Putin-backed peace plan. The normalization of military force against domestic opponents, I think, is actually a real threat to Europe because our far-right parties are learning from what's happening in the US. And kind of going on to that is this just support of the strong man, right? It's the support of Orban, of the AfD, of Marine Le Pen, of Reform at best, Tommy Robinson at worst in the UK. this kind of consistent attack on European freedom and free speech, and how Europe has to be freed from its immigrant nightmare. There's obviously the economic threats, tariffs, most recently the latest threat related to Greenland, a very, very strong push to retaliate against any perceived EU regulations, and a push for bilateral deals, so explicitly trying to undermine what the EU stands for. And then, of course, there's the withdrawing from all the international collaborations, which the EU is a very strong partner in. And then I think it really is about time, and I know that this has accelerated, I think, in Europe now. We do understand that America is no longer the European protector. And more than that, it's the threat. And I think what is quite scary for me, thinking about it as a threat, is that our security is so intimately tied up with the US intelligence, military capability, but also technology. You know, that is their technology in our weapons and our defense systems, in our cloud computing, in our computers, in our phones, in GPS. It's all based in the States, right? If the States put sanctions on European countries, it would completely and utterly disrupt our way of life. And I think that is quite scary. So I just want to now talk a little bit about the US attack on Venezuela, because what I did at the beginning of January after what happened is I kind of plotted out all of the actions I'd logged that led up to it. And so you've got the cumulative number of attacks on the vertical axis, and this is dates starting from September. And basically everything that isn't labeled is a single boat strike. And so they started in September, had a lot in October, November. Then there was kind of this pause, and then a lot towards the end of December. And they started seizing the oil tankers. And then there were 5 boat strikes in one day. And then there was the attack and the capture of Maduro. And then effectively, Trump said the US is going to be in charge of Venezuela. And they've left the current regime in place and basically said, but do what we want. But what I thought was really interesting is that if you actually look at what looked like dead points, they're not dead points. So there was a lot of US military buildup. So every dot here is a bit of military buildup. So it wasn't a surprise. So it wasn't a surprise to me that this was going to happen, because we could literally see them preparing for it. But more than that, there was a legal buildup. So these are all the actions, and they really start escalating in October and November, when there was a bit of a dead zone, where the US puts in place mechanisms to make it legal to do what they did. They do things like declaring the drug cartels unlawful combatants. They talk about, they declare them terrorists. They say that the US is in armed conflicts with drug cartels. Then they name Maduro as head of a drug cartel. Then they sanction Maduro, you know, and then they basically set up a situation, like including things like designating fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction, in a way that would allow them some kind of legal viability for what happened. And it started in the summer. So I think that is something to remember. Like, this wasn't a sudden decision. They've been building up to this for months. And now I just want to kind of go on to Greenland, where I did the same thing. And what's interesting for Greenland is, so far, it's mainly threats. But there isn't any attempt at legal buildup, because there isn't a legal justification. Like, no one can credibly say that Greenland isn't democratic, that it's corrupt, that it's supplying the US with drugs, or whatever it happens to be. And so it's basically, the justification is, I want it. There isn't anything really beyond that. So these are the kind of actions since the 20th of January. So very early on, within a week or two of inauguration, Trump said he wanted Greenland. And he said he won't. And from in May, he already said he won't rule out military force. So one of the things that I just want to highlight here is that the US position on Greenland has been very consistent all year. I don't think Europe ever wanted to believe it. And then there was this kind of spate of people being arrested in Greenland, like American agents trying to undermine it. And what I think here is quite interesting is that back in October, the administration announced it was going to shift almost $2 billion in foreign aid towards funding America First initiatives. And they explicitly said that included pursuing their interests in Greenland and countering Marxist regimes in Latin America. So they have tied Greenland to Venezuela the whole time. And then you see this massive escalation at the end of the year. First, it's appointing a special envoy to Greenland who explicitly said, I can't wait for Greenland to be part of the US. Trump then said the US needed Greenland for national protection and that we have to have it. And he said that a week before they went into Venezuela. So Greenland wasn't a reaction to Venezuelan success. He started that before the Venezuela operation. Okay, so I think we have to see this as part and parcel of the same thing. And he was serious about Venezuela, and so I'm pretty sure he's serious about Greenland. And this particular one kind of goes up to the 9th of January, and it says, and this plot ended saying Donald Trump said we're going to do something with Greenland, whether they like it or not. So then today, I thought, well, I'll update it and see what's happened over the last 10 days. I'm not going to go into it, but basically you can see that it has ratcheted up and ratcheted up and ratcheted up with the declaration of tariffs at the weekend. Whenever they've had the opportunity to de-escalate, they are not de-escalating. And just today, you had Bessent saying at Davos that Europeans project weakness, the US projects strength as a justification for taking Greenland. And Stephen Miller, who's the deputy chief of staff to Trump and very, very influential in his foreign policy, basically said that nations aren't entitled to territories they can't defend. So kind of looking at domestic aggression. So what I really want to discuss is kind of the US domestic threat to its population. So the militarization of domestic law enforcement or particularly around ICE, immigration enforcement. And what has happened over the last year, and what I think is really interesting with this, is that you also see that alongside sending ICE to democratic cities and alongside the escalation in violence, you can see a very clear build-up of the legal justification and the resources that ICE needs to become what it has become. It has been a deliberate strategy from day one of this administration. So this is a timeline. There's a hell of a lot that's happened, right? It's hundreds of actions. So I've only highlighted the major ones. There will be a spreadsheet giving people links to all of them. And I'm just going to zoom in on bits so you can kind of see it in a bit more detail. So this is kind of the first 8-9 months. But one of the very first things that happened was an executive order explicitly giving more power to ICE. And then the next thing that happened in March was shutting down the federal watchdog agencies that oversee ICE and make sure what it does is legal and proportionate. In May, Trump added $70 million to the ICE annual budget, which was a 6-fold increase. Then their arrest targets increased, tripled, in fact. And then in June, you start having the deployment of ICE National Guard Marines to Los Angeles. And that was the first city, but there have been many cities since then. By July, you've got ICE basically saying that, you've got Trump saying that ICE agents can protect themselves using whatever means necessary. And then you're also starting to see the expansion of ICE as a surveillance organization. So in July, it was reported that ICE officers can now use a facial recognition app that has 200 million images, that Medicaid personal data, including addresses and ethnicity, is being handed to immigration authorities. And one of the things that DOJ did was try and make sure that that information was shared with ICE. You start seeing really aggressive recruitment. So Kristi Noem, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, has offered a $50,000 sign-on bonus for joining ICE to defend the homeland. Training has been shortened and entry requirements are far lower than, say, the police or the army. By beginning of August, the Internal Revenue Service starts sharing taxpayer data with ICE. This is when also they go into Washington, D.C. The D.C. Police Department is put under federal control. Then at first they said, oh, they're not armed. Within a few weeks, they say they may be armed. A few weeks after that, they say all of them are armed. Then there's an executive order, which I think is really sinister, which basically says that the government is going to establish specialized under its own control National Guard units to address public order issues. And this is basically a clear way to suppress protest when and if it's used. Then we start seeing ICE getting more spyware. And then you can start seeing, so I've cut this off here, but the ICE starts saying you don't have to fill out lots of paperwork. It gives officers a lot more leeway to do things hard and fast and not have to document it. In September, we get a first really public killing of ICE killing a man in Chicago during an arrest attempt. And then you see them threatening federal assault charges on anyone attacking their officers. This was actually saying they're not going to comply with the mask ban. So basically, some states have tried to say you're not allowed to go masked. They've ignored that. And so you can literally just be kidnapped by a person who never identifies themselves. Since then, things have carried on escalating. Again, by middle of September, Trump says Portland, we're now in Portland, war ravaged, and says he authorizes full force. Trump then suggests the military use dangerous cities as training grounds. You can see they're continuing their surveillance. It turns out ICE has spent 70 million on new weapons. Stephen Miller starts, which I think is quite dangerous, the rhetoric around dissent being anti-American, being subversive, being traitorous. He says anyone attempting to interfere with ICE could be arrested for criminal conspiracy against the US. You have another citizen shot in October. The Pentagon then orders the states to start having quick reaction forces for crowd control. I think you can kind of see where this is going. And by December, you have an all-time high number of people in immigration detention, and the human rights conditions in these detentions are horrific. And then you have the shooting of Rene Good, followed by a JD Vance saying ICE agents have absolute immunity, and the lies around from the state about what happened. And just in the last week, I've updated it actually since October. This is how many things have happened. It's a lot. I'm just going to go through the things in red, just some of the major things. The ones in black are mostly credible evidence reports of violence against US citizens by ICE agents with complete impunity. 8th of January, there's more reports that ICE has expanded its phone surveillance capabilities. Nome then adds more restrictions to stop Congress people visiting ICE facilities. So they're becoming a closed environment where you can do what the hell you want. 1,000 more immigration agents are sent to Minneapolis. Minneapolis feels like it's under occupation. Following on from what Vance says, the Department of Homeland Security officially tweets that ICE agents have federal immunity. It's not actually a thing, but that's what they've asserted. Tim Walz, who's the governor of Minnesota, I think this is quite awful, basically said this week or last week that ICE agents are going door to door and asking for people of color to be reported to them. Trump also threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act. By invoking the Insurrection Act, it allows him to send the US military into American cities and not just as observers. It's always been the case in the States that you don't have to carry your papers around with you, right? That was part of fundamental freedoms. Now, Noam says that ICE agents can ask citizens for proof of citizenship. So it's basically saying ICE can have freedom to target people, basically based on the color of their skin. Trump then extended the deployment of National Guard in DC. So I think, he moves on to different cities and we forget about the cities he's been in, but they're still there. The threat hasn't gone away. On Saturday, it was reported that a Cuban immigrant had been killed at an ICE facility. Basically, he'd been restrained and and held in a chokehold and died, which is how George Floyd died 6 years ago. And then also given it was 6 years ago, Department of Justice announced it's not investigating the shooting of Rene Good. In fact, the only thing the FBI are investigating is whether Rene Good was involved in left-wing terrorists. So I think it is pretty dark. So what does that mean for the midterms? So to have free and fair elections, I think you need to have a lot of things in place. And first of all, there are lots of ways of subverting it. The first is structural manipulation. There's gerrymandering, there's control of the Electoral Commission. The administration has already disbanded a lot of the watchdogs and work teams that were there to try and protect the integrity of elections. They've got rid of them. It's making it basically a lot easier for intellectual election interference by, say, Russia. There's restricting voter access. So some of this was happening pre-2025. So things like removing Sunday voting, which was when a lot of Black communities traditionally voted after church. Trump has been desperately trying to remove mail-in voting or an early voting, which he thinks would benefit him. There's a lot of kind of local laws around about where voting booths are, who can support people in polling lines that basically disproportionately affect Democrat voters. They're making it a lot harder for people to register to vote. We saw last year that that Musk basically bribed people to register as Republican voters. And I suspect what they're planning on doing is putting ICE agents at polling stations in cities and suppress the vote that way. There's been a continual, I mean, obviously it's still the official position that Trump won the 2020 election, but the kind of narrative of fraudulent elections has been in the background all year. Every time there's an opportunity, they will push a narrative on voter fraud, whether that's mail-in voting, non-citizens voting. In fact, just today, I think it was Stephen Miller who was talking about how the Democrats basically import immigrants to vote for them. There's sowing doubt about voting machinery, and there's kind of politicized investigation into election workers, which they've already started. And they've asked basically all the blue states to hand over their voting records. And then, of course, even if the Democrats manage to pull off a midterms victory, despite all of that, then will they accept it? And I think for some reason, some people I know think they will, but last time he lost, he didn't accept it. So I'm just kind of like, I can't remember his name, Jack someone or other. He was investigating Jack Smith. He was investigating the January 6th, and he testified in front of Congress under oath. And he basically said the evidence is incontrovertible that Trump was planning a conspiracy to try and overturn that election. And in November, when they had the kind of, wasn't the midterms, but kind of a set of local elections, the Republicans again basically started saying there was a lot of election interference when the Democrats did well. And this is from the Washington Post a few days ago, basically saying that Trump is trying to change how the midterms are conducted. We're a year in, the midterms are 11 months away. I just don't feel as if we can be sure that they will happen in the way that we think they're going to happen, in the way that they should happen. And just finally, on naming it for what it is. And maybe not the people on this call, but I think so many people have forgotten. We've forgotten how to recognize fascism. It's almost 100 years since the rise of fascism in Europe. America never really experienced fascism. It sees fascism as a European issue. And I think we've forgotten. And then Heather Cox Richardson, who writes about what's happening in the US, she's amazing. But she kind of, in one of her letters in a Substack post, talked about this fact sheet from 1945 by the US military on how to recognize fascism in the US. And I went and I looked it up, and it is quite disconcerting to read. It's like, can we spot it? And it basically said, how can we identify Native American fascists at work? One of the things it says is any fascist attempt to gain power in America would work under the guise of super patriotism and super Americanism. I mean, it's here, right? They say it would involve the pitting of religious, racial, and economic groups against each other. That it has often been anti-Jew, anti-Negro, anti-Labor, anti-foreign born, And interwoven with the master race theory of fascism is a well-planned hate campaign against minority races, religions, and other groups. Fascists will use any combination of such groups as a convenient scapegoat. This was from Kristi Noem, Homeland Security Secretary, in the beginning of December. I'm recommending a full travel ban on every damn country that's been flooding our nation with killers, leeches, and entitlement junkies. That is how white supremacists talk about other nations. They also said fascists deny the need for international cooperation. The brotherhood of man implies that all people have rights. International cooperation runs counter to the fascist program of war and world domination. In place of international cooperation, the fascists seek to substitute a perverted sort of ultranationalism which tells their people they are the only people in the world who count. Our native fascists, by which we're talking the American fascists in the 1940s, are spreading anti-British, anti-Soviet, anti-French, and anti-United Nations propaganda. I mean, we have seen America withdraw from international organizations. It either withdraws or it tries to destabilize or it tries to stop them working. This is a tweet from Homeland Security from December saying America is the only place where miracles not only happen, but where they happen all the time. It's this American exceptionalism idea. Earlier this year, so a few weeks ago, Pete Hegseth, who calls himself Secretary of War, Secretary of Defense, said he's on currently the Arsenal of Freedom tour, basically saying America's military is the strongest, fastest, and most powerful on earth. It's the glorification of the US. And then the last thing it says is there's this kind of indiscriminate pinning of the label red on people and proposals. Basically, fascists make the spurious claim that it's either them or communism, and they label as communism everyone who refuses to support them. So I've just picked out Stephen Miller, who, as I said, is the Deputy Chief of Staff for Trump. Every time a judge rules against the administration, he calls them radical communist judges. That's what he does. He's literally doing what it says here. And just this week, he tweeted about the protesters in Minneapolis against what's been going on with ICE there, calling them professional class leftists. And this is the last slide. I went on to whatisfascism.org today. They have 20 signs of how to spot fascism. What are the early warning signs? Extreme nationalism. Yes, we have it. Dismissal of human rights. Yes, we have it. They've withdrawn from the UN Human Rights Council. They've banned asylum. Well, the only refugees that they'll accept are white Afrikaners. Identification of enemies as a unifying cause. Yes, we're seeing that. Supremacy of the military. I think I just showed you that Hegseth tweet. There is this glorification of the military, and it's really gone into overdrive since the operation in Venezuela in December and January. I haven't talked about the control of mass media at all, but maybe this should be orange, but they're definitely getting there. They've cancelled funding for all of the public radio. They've shut down Voice of America. They've basically, CBS News has been taken over by a Trump-friendly media mogul, and they're already starting to censor their news. And now Trump's gunning for CNN, and he basically has an ally who wants to take over that instead of Netflix. Religion and government are intertwined. There's been a lot of executive orders about protecting Christianity in America, about privileging Christianity in America, which is directly counter to the Constitution. And also a lot of the imagery is explicitly Christian, right-wing, and white. Again, I haven't really talked about corruption, but there's a lot of corporate backhanding going on. There's been a very concerted attack on labor unions, basically ever since the beginning, particularly because of what's happened in Doge, but effectively pretty much every federal agency has now stopped recognizing the trade unions of their affected federal workforce. And also the government has basically said that any company that wants to contract with it cannot, say, have EDI policies or anything like that. So basically they're really interfering in fair workplaces in the US. There's been a concerted and consistent and actually very effective attack on universities, um, which have pretty much all capitulated. There's also been an attack on the arts. Trump likes to attack anyone who disagrees with him, like he did it with George Clooney not so very long ago. But also, firing the entire board of the Kennedy Arts Center, putting in his own people and renaming it. His first film's going to be Melania. Like that's happening. There's obviously an obsession with crime punishment. I don't think I need to go into that. I've discussed elections. So I think the big test is going to be the midterms. We'll see. Mass deportations are happening. It's been a massive attack on EDI. They've literally gone to the Smithsonian and national parks and asked them to remove content on slavery and the history of slavery. They've removed content on Trump's impeachment. They're having they're reviewing the Smithsonian content to check it is aligned with the administration's values, and they're doing it to the primary school curriculum as well, which I think is even more dangerous. What you teach your children. I don't think we can deny there's a cult of personality around Trump. Every time a newspaper or broadcast station says something that Trump doesn't like, he threatens to sue them, and often he does sue them. He was now suing the BBC, he's suing the New York Times, he's sued CNN, he's sued CBS News, he's sued 60 Minutes, he's got people fired. Like this is happening in science, is happening. You're not allowed to use certain terms in grant proposals or in publications. You're not allowed to publish with foreign scientists in many situations. This is happening. Discuss the militarization of the police. I can talk a lot about suppression of scientific freedom and the tariffs as just one example of the kind of economic nationalism that's going on, right? This is where we are. And I don't think it helps anyone to step back from calling it. America is now, I think, an authoritarian system. I think it is fascist. I think the administration is fascist. And the midterms are really, I think, the last chance to pull back from that. And with that, I will end.
Wow, Christina, I feel like applauding and standing right on the Zoom. A lot of reactions in the chat there as well. And just to say, like, thank you. I'm genuinely in awe to see all of this data just laid out so clearly and starkly. And yet at the same time, it's so jarring knowing that there are people in our media, pundits in the UK and others who still refuse to call Trump a fascist, who haven't, engaged with history or even the current politics. And so to have that laid out so clearly, we will take this recording and we will share it because I think your slides are just brilliant. We don't have too long, and we do have various questions in the chat. We do have a few questions from our side that maybe I'll jump in. Just to say at the top, we've had some questions come through about, campaigning in the UK, resisting kind of the rise of the far right here. We very much want to direct questions about Christina's work, the Action Tracker, but Christina, do feel free to come in on that. But just to say, at Stop Trump Coalition, we are about stopping Trumpism and the rise of those far right politics here, and we will be able to share more about our plans for the year. We have a mailing list, which I'll put a link to in the chat. So please do, if you're not on our mailing list, please do sign up. But also follow us on social media, and we have ways for you to get involved there. So we will come back to that a bit later, but specifically around this incredible data in this work. Christina, it feels somewhat, there's so much, we're kind of drowning in this kind of strategic work of Trump and his administration to flood the zone with so much that you can't kind of keep up. How have you coped with the sheer quantity of the noise, and picking through like what really counts and what's having an impact? And I suppose just thinking about that slide you had where you had that huge spike in activity and actions around Greenland. And I suppose what are some of those kind of early warning signs that show an issue is really about to spike? And are there any other issues that maybe aren't like right in the media right now around Greenland, Venezuela, that are potentially could explode in the coming weeks or through this year?
Well, that's a lot of questions. Um, I think, I mean, doing the tracker, it is a lot. I mean, it is a lot of work. Like both me and then the main person who does it, who finds the actions with me, Sandy, we're both spending, 10, 15 hours a week on top of our jobs trying to do this. But I think it feels important. It feels to me like whatever happens, that there will be some kind of contemporaneous referenced record. And as I said, like when I've started been doing these timelines this year, you can it's been incredibly helpful because you can see the build up. You can see not just the actions, but the legal build up. So you can kind of see that it is a plan. It's not random. And I think too many people think it is. Um, I think what I'm seeing, which is quite disturbing, is the increase in violence against US citizens by ICE. It does seem to be acting with complete impunity right now in Minneapolis. They're not even investigating the shooting of Rene Good. Um, but it's not just that, but there's so many reports now of people saying it's my right to witness it. There, at the side of the road, there was the state attorney from Minnesota said she identified herself because I'm attorney from Minnesota. I'm standing here at the side. I'm just going to watch. And they ran at her and pumped a full can of pepper spray in her face, in her body, and literally had to strip off in the street because it was so painful. And there's no comeback from that. No one's doing anything about it, and I think that is quite scary. And how much is it being normalized? We've just heard there are 1,500 military in Alaska in case he puts in the Insurrection Act. And once you have things like the Insurrection Act being invoked, then I think you're really having to worry about the elections and what's going to happen. Not so much that they'll be called off, but who's going to get to vote is something which I think is really frightening. And the fact that there is no pushback from the Republicans, Congress has completely and utterly abdicated its position as an equal pillar of state.
Mm.
And so I was talking to someone today about the Constitution because she's an American and she's been looking at how these actions translate into constitutional violations. And what you're saying is that there are some things that do, like executive overreach, federalism, where you're basically not respecting states' rights, the appropriations of basically he's spending money that Congress has the right to spend. He's attacking countries that Congress has the right to kind of declare war and so on. But there's a lot of things happening that don't break the Constitution, but break the spirit of the Constitution. And I think America needs to have a conversation of the Constitution is meant to be this is a declaration of our freedoms and this is how we hold government to account. It's failing. It is utterly failing right now. And you have to stop seeing that constitution as some kind of biblical document and start seeing it as your defense against authoritarianism and how does it need to be changed. It's time to have more amendments to the constitution to make it fit for the modern age. And that conversation should be starting now. The Democrats should be having that conversation now.
Mm, absolutely. I suppose that was almost preempting our kind of next question. And there's absolutely this gulf. I was going to say a gap, but it's more of a gulf, isn't it? Between what is happening and almost if you could map on the other end the responses from Democrats, from other civil society groups, as well as the political party. And we're seeing amazing resistance in the streets, particularly in Minnesota right now. But the Democrats seem very out of step, and as you say, the Republicans in the Senate as well. So between the Congress and the Senate, but also the courts. You mentioned an attorney general and things at state level, not just at the federal level. How do you see like the response there moving forward, and what is that role, as you say, not just amendments to the Constitution, but how can people kind of give weight to what they should be doing, where often we're not seeing some of the leadership in the Democratic Party that we might want to see. But certainly, yeah, I'm very not up to date with what's happening in the courts and what's happening in the
So
Senate.
I think what you're saying in the US, I think is really interesting if you look at the opposition. The opposition is being led by the labor unions and civil rights organizations, like the ACLU. Um, and what I think is interesting about it is that these are the organizations that have been fighting government for decades, if not centuries. They know how to do this. They have lawyers, they know how to work together, they know how to create community. They know how. They know that it can take years and years and years and years. They're well funded, and they've had by far the most success. You're seeing that the justice system at the non-Supreme Court level is holding. You're seeing even a lot of Trump appointed judges are ruling against him. But unfortunately, when it gets to the Supreme Court, that isn't holding, say, I think in almost, well, it's something like well over 2/3 of times it's reached the Supreme Court, they found in favor of Trump. And that is, and at the moment, they're not, like they haven't announced yet on the tariffs, they haven't announced on the Voting Rights Act. And so we don't really know where they're going to go with that. But that is, I think, is the real flashpoint. What you've seen as well is that the universities have not responded well, the scientific organizations have not responded well, the health system generally hasn't responded well, the media organizations haven't responded well. And I think they haven't felt under attack before. They don't know how to work together. Scientists often feel very wary about being political. It's something I get accused of. You're a scientist. Oh, you're not being proper scientist. And I'm like, look, I'm following the facts. And if the facts are leading me to saying this is a fascist place, then that's what I have to say. But there's this real reluctance to put your head above the parapet. So there's so many people, especially in positions of influence, that are just trying to keep quiet and get over it and think, oh, we've only got 3 years. You don't know that. You have to fight for it. And the media companies have just rolled over. I mean, I was really worried the BBC was going to roll over when he came for them. So thankfully, so far they haven't. But the government hasn't been supportive. Our government hasn't been supportive of the BBC. So I feel like it's the politicians almost who've been the very weakest, and I just don't understand why.
Yeah, thank you. And really great point around the role of, labor unions and workers in the kind of resistance there. I suppose just to go to some of the questions that people have fed in. So thank you everyone for submitting your kind of questions. We have one or two on boycotts. What do you think about the power of boycotting American goods as the way to go?
I mean, I'm not sure what impact it will have. I think what would have an impact is if the EU used its economic might to actually do reverse tariffs, but it would come at a lot of economic cost. And the same in Britain. Um, you know, I don't, I mean, I think one of the really hard things is that we feel powerless. And I think as citizens of a country Trump doesn't give a shit about, we kind of are powerless. And I think the ways that we can use our voice is to support Americans, is to kind of highlight to our friends, our families, our communities, particularly our politicians, that actually we are seeing what's happening. And we have to think about how do we protect UK democracy? Like we've seen what's happened in the last year. We've seen how quickly a nation can fall. We've got 3 years to shore up our democracy. And I'm seeing, so I really fear that Labour doesn't see that we're in an existential time of the far right of rising across Europe. They've got money. I have absolutely no doubt that Musk is going to put hundreds of millions of dollars into it. We're not used to that kind of political money in Europe anywhere. And it wouldn't surprise me if America wanted to, if it's still on this path, that it would start interfering directly, threaten sanctions if you don't vote for them. Like who knows? But we have to start planning for it. And we're
Absolutely.
not.
And I suppose that links to a question. So one question from, I think it was Chris Clement in the chat about the amount of money behind right-wing parties at the moment. Musk, Peter Thiel of Palantir and others putting money in. We've also seen, Reform recently receive a £9 million donation. Small fry compared to the $270 million dollars that Elon Musk spent to elect Donald Trump and other Republicans. When you speak about, kind of protecting ourselves from these oligarchs, and resisting that. What does that kind of look like? And you've mentioned sanctions. Anything that the EU's kind of they're discussing their anti-coercion instrument, this kind of trade bazooka to retaliate. How do we go beyond kind of tit for tat tariffs and make sure that that's targeted towards the oligarchs that are really supporting and funding and driving forward this agenda?
I think one of the biggest things we can do is to protect our free press, to avoid, that the issue in the US, the reason Trump still has a base of 40% that's never going to abandon him is because Fox News has a different version of reality, and that's where people get their news from. And the whole thing is schismed. And 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 GB News isn't there yet, right? But it is scaring me. Like that's what we have to stop. We have to make sure that people still have some kind of shared understanding of what the facts are. I think the EU's passed legislation, I think last summer, that is trying to counter misinformation in social media and online. And one of the things they've done is they basically passed a law saying you cannot get advertising revenue for a viral video that is misinformation, which I think is a really interesting way of doing it. You're basically taking away the financial incentive of disinformation and extremist content. But I think that could be really powerful. Obviously, the tech bros hate it. Um, so I think we have to protect our information spaces. I'm currently working on a project to try and look at how we can protect our scientific institutions in the UK, which are more vulnerable than the US. Um, the biggest issue is complacency. So much, like say the Met Office, which includes the Hadley Centre for Climate Change as one of the world's leading climate change centres. That has no legislative underpinning. It's funded by government. It could be shut down by government overnight. There's nothing to stop it happening. You know, we could shut down the UK Health Security Agency, who did its Public Health England during the pandemic. That we don't actually have the protections that we think we have. The Medicines Health Regulation Authority has no statutory underpinning. That could be changed. Its priorities changed, its leadership changed. So what I want to do is to put in place a system where we do have some legal protections. Now, of course, a new government could pass new laws, right? Parliament is sovereign in this country, but it forces it to be open and it forces it to be slow and it forces them to say, this is a higher priority than X. And so what you're doing is you're putting sand in the gears. And I think we need to start thinking about how to do that. And not just for that, but across all kinds of aspects of civil life.
Fantastic. I suppose we're kind of nearing the end. We'll go a few minutes over. That sounds like really important work that you're going to be doing.
Someone
What would
just
you
talked
like?
about NCAR, which is the national equivalent of the Hadley Centre. I think it's shut in Boulder. They've closed it down.
So what, one kind of the more final question for you. What would you like us to do with your tracker? This is an incredible resource. We obviously now have this recording and we'll kind of put this out more widely, but how can we help you in the work that you're doing, both in relation to Trump, but also into the rise of the far right here?
I mean, there are two things. So one thing is just to make people aware that it exists. It's not the kind of thing that people are going to be looking at every day, but I think I really want people to know it's there as a resource for journalists, for people who are organizing in some sense to resist, for Americans to know that there's something they can look up. Um, in the other thing I'm trying to do is find proper funding for it. At the moment, there's none. But I can't really do it by crowdfunding. I need to be able to hire somebody or two people, which is, a much more significant amount of money. And I can't do it via my personal bank account. It has to be done by university. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do to make sure that it's resilient. Like I have committed to doing it at least until 2028, 2029. But it would be much easier to do it if there was some support, and there'd be so much more we can do with it. So, for instance, I would love to build like a blue sky bot that would post out every time there's an action and people could follow. Like other ways of engaging, doing more stuff with YouTube or TikTok, where a lot of younger people are like those kinds of things. I think are really important, and at the moment, I just don't have the capacity to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Funding and capacity, huge challenges. Well, we will definitely. You think you've got 200 people on this call who are going to try and put the word out, but we will do our best. So thank you to everyone for coming. And I just want to say on behalf of the entire Stop Trump Coalition, a huge thank you. We are entirely funded by public donations, and so thank you again to those of you who are supporters and who are able to contribute just a small amount a month. I've just put a link into the chat. If you'd like to become a supporter, please do head to our website. Thank you to Christina, who is absolutely brilliant, and we look forward to maybe welcoming you back, Christina. Could we have you again at some point down the line?
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Amazing. We'll take that. So we can continue to keep track of Trump and hold him accountable. And thank you all for joining. We will follow up with all of you via email. Thank you. Take care.